orchid seeds, wild collected seeds. These are all seeds that came from plants that were in the wild.
So are you keeping them as living tissue and seed banking, or are you
Yes.
both?
Yes, I flower everything I get. Well, not every, like 98% of our plants flower, and if it flowers, it seeds. It's just a matter of getting it to do so, or it's autonomous, where it's like self-pollinated and it will just reproduce on its own, which grows. Bucephalandra. This is something that, hit me really hard, like I was talking about earlier with Borneo. There's like me and 2 other people in the United States that are trying to farm Bucephalandra for other purposes than to sell it. that's like weird. There's like probably 50 to 60 people out there selling it, farming it and selling it, and just selling it to whoever. There's no value. Like, oh, you're a noob in the hobby? Here, have this rare plant. We're just kind of throwing stuff away. So my goal, like I said, is to get some more hobbyists, hopefully some people in this room interested in wanting to get in this project with me. So that way I can send you my plants and get you to grow my plants here in Kansas, because I don't have anybody in Kansas yet. It'd be nice to get people all across the United States interested in this and doing something with it. And you could even end up, turning it into some sort of side business for you too. Because the way it works is, let's say you're not a member of the horticulture team. You're not, one of my registered growers. Obviously, you don't get the plant for free, but you can purchase it from whoever is closest in your area that makes sense for shipping. So that's all on the site. That all allows people to select their own horticulturalist who they get to buy from. So you get to buy from whomever, and I take no cut. I don't want any cut of your plant. I don't care. It has nothing to do with that. It's just about keeping the plant hobby. So now we'll get back into the horticulture side. I've done my spiel. So misinformation equals failure with plants. A lot of people will go off of stuff that they read from sites that are not very solid as far as their information goes. They'll hear a horror story from somebody and get scared away from plants. Or that's the wrong slide. Or they'll buy a plant and assume it's an aquatic plant and it'll fail, and then they won't want to do plants anymore because they had bad experience. But for every one of these like fake aquatics, like that's purple waffle, I'm sure you guys have all seen it. There's an equal that looks almost like it. Pretty sure that looks just like it. That's Heptus Laurentino. That is a fully aquatic plant. But again, people still sell that. Like you can still find that for sale, the purple waffle, and it's still sold as a fully aquatic plant. So again, as I was talking before, you have to know what you're looking for as far as these plants. You have to know what they are, and if you're unsure, it never hurts to ask anybody. That's what's great about clubs like this, is that you guys have to go to plants and talk about stuff like that. So now we were talking before about limiting factors. I mentioned it with the floating leaf plants about how when they break the surface of the water, they basically don't have any more limiting factors. So limiting factors are anything that prohibits growth of something. So like you have with pretty much every species, and the limiting factor is temperature. With plants, the main limiting factor is light. You can't photosynthesize without light, so that's their main limiting factor. So a lot is going on the screen there. But anyway, so the intensity is the first thing. Light intensity is huge for these plants. A lot of them, because they're at different depths of water, water diffuses light. So if you have, a plant that's 22 inches underwater and you're using a really simple desk lamp, the likelihoods are it's not going to get enough light to do what you need it to do. It's not going to be happy. It's not going to grow. And if it does grow, it'll kind of be leggy and stretch and try to get to that light as much as it can. And its bottom leaves will rot off or fall off because they're not needed. They're not photosynthesizing. The top leaves are. So anytime you have a plant where your bottom leaves are falling off repetitively, it's your light. you need to get more light in there. The bottom leaves are useless, so the plant says, I don't need you. Why am I feeding you? So it lets them go. Quality. This is something newish, I guess. Red and blue spectrum of light is more readily absorbed by the chlorophyll. So using the right type of light, so using just a plain white LED as compared to using RGB LED, and they're only like a $10 difference when you buy them, is going to make a huge difference in your plants, especially in pigment. May not so much in growing. You can grow a plant with any spectrum of light, but in pigmentation, it's going to come down to the spectrum. There's so many myths going on about iron affecting color and da-da-da-da-da-da. Iron does not affect the color of plants at all. It's an uptake nutrient. It will affect the ability to uptake nutrients that affect the color of your plants, but it doesn't affect the color of your plants at all. Light intensity and nitrogen levels are what affect the color of your plants. Lowering nitrate levels causes the production of chlorophyll to stop. So then all you have is, you just lost your green pigment. So if you're a colored plant, if you have any kind of other colored pigment in your leaves and you take away the green, that other color is going to come through. So your red plants, like the Ludwigia palustris, so that didn't work. What was up there for a second? The red plant, like Ludwigia palustris, you blast it with light and lower the nitrates, it's going to turn almost a maroon color. It'll be so vibrant red that it's ridiculous. And the same goes for the ramosiars. You drop the nitrogen and you blast the light, it'll be, the difference is huge, especially with the red and blue bulbs. Now some of the newer LEDs, they have like the green and like yellow and all these other different color bulbs thrown in there too. There's no science backing that, but I can say from personal experience that they do something. Like either it's just more intensity so it grows the plant better or whatever, but I've noticed with the newer, like the SB Reef lights or even some of the other light boxes that are out there on the market today, that it does affect the growth and it does affect the color big time. And duration, of course. Like the longer you have the plant exposed, that's how long photosynthesis occurs. So if you have your lights on for 12 hours, that plant's going to try to photosynthesize for 12 hours. If it doesn't have the nutrients it needs for photosynthesis, you're growing algae at that point. So it's all about knowing where to cut that off. It's all a curve. Temperature is the most common one. Like I said, everything's affected by temperature. There's not a thing on this earth that, you know, isn't affected by temperature in some way or another. Like you have those weird bear things that live in the ocean. I can't remember, the water bears. Yeah, those, yes. Yeah. They look like little bears. So yeah, those that live in like the geothermal pockets and stuff like that, but they can't live outside of those geothermal pockets. So, you know, they're still affected by heat, and the plants are the same way. Like the Ripperora aquatica was one of the plants that Dan and I found when we went out today. And that is the coolest plant when it comes to temperature, because it has different leaf structures for every temperature it's in. It'll actually grow a bladed leaf in like a 70-degree water. And then you go lower than that, it grows more of an oblong leaf. And then you go lower than that, it'll shoot up and make like almost this fern-looking leaf with different different nodes coming off of it. It's a really interesting plant, and you guys have it right in your backyard, like 10 minutes from here. So Dan had a good idea of setting up like a system where it's seasonal, so like in someone's basement unheated, so you can actually get the full development or rotation of the plant leaves throughout the year, which is a cool idea. So with the temperature of the plants, if your temperature is too high, CO2 absorption, CO2 saturation of the water is going to be really low. CO2 and O2. You're going to have to really either crank your CO2 up or not use CO2 and just stick with, you know, the warm water, low tech, or I hate using the word low tech, non-CO2 necessity plants. Now, the colder you get, the better your saturation gets, but you get too cold, you get to a point where these plants can't live. So there's a happy medium. I keep my tanks at like anywhere between 72 to 75 degrees, and I notice, you know, a a lot better growth in these ranges. This one here is probably to me the most important because it's the most overlooked and or frowned upon for some reason. Carbon dioxide. Plants, every plant, all plants use carbon dioxide regardless of if they're in a non-CO2 supplemented tank or if they're in a CO2 supplemented tank, they're going to use carbon dioxide. It's in your water if you inject it or not. So when we start off with our tanks, regardless if you fill a tank just readily, let's say you just take a bowl and you fill it with water. There's CO2 in there already from air gas and from basically the water going through the air and diffusing through the air, it catches CO2. And atmospheric pressure as well will push CO2, and anytime you do a water change, you're adding CO2 as well. So you have some of these low-tech tanks that people keep, or non-CO2 injected tanks with plants. Some people want to argue, oh, well, you don't need CO2 to grow that. You're right, well, how often do you do maintenance? What do you do? How often are you doing water changes? What's your surface agitation like? Those are all variables that control CO2. And this is why the whole term CO2 necessity or CO2 needed plants is kind of working, because it is true. Any plant can be grown without plants, but you're going to have a harder time, and you're really going to have to know what you're doing as far as setting your tank up the right way to do it. I honestly believe non-CO2 supplemented tanks are harder to keep looking pretty and nice and healthy plant growth than CO2 injected tanks. It's just a hump you have to get over with CO2 coming. So this is what we were just talking about. CO2 actually is super important to photosynthesis. CO2 helps the production of basically every enzyme in that plant. Without it, everything is slowed, again, because it's a limiting factor. At the same time, though, you need to have oxygen in your tank, too. And this is a battle that I'm having with some other horticulturalists or whatever, with adding air stones or adding sponge filters in addition to CO2 injection, or even adding electrolysis devices to create oxygen. As you see, like those algae scrubbers, the electronic algae scrubbers, all those are doing is sitting off oxygen in the tank. That's all it's doing. And that helps the respiration of the plant, which helps plant health, which healthy plants don't grow algae. So it's a theory, but there hasn't been any way to prove or disprove it yet. So it all goes down to more people trying weirder things. So for those people that are interested in trying CO2 but are unsure where to start, like they want to get the drop checker things or whatever, have you guys seen those? Yeah, those are useless. Those will tell you what the CO2 is in your tank 2 hours ago. If you really want to do CO2, get a pH pen, a decent one that'll actually not need calibrating every time you use it. A good pH pen and a KH test kit you guys have available right over there. You need to know those two things to have the number you're looking for, to actually know how much CO2 you're putting in your tank. And the way you do it is you take your ambient pH, so you test the water without any gas going into it. Probably about an hour before you turn your CO2 on, you test the water. So you get that number, you take that number, and you're looking for, after your gas goes on, you're looking for about a 1.2 drop in pH, because CO2 is acidic, so it affects your pH. So with your KH, you test your KH after you start the gas, and then after about an hour, you test your pH again. So then you take those numbers, and you just follow it on the graph here. The pH, let's say your pH was, mine's low, mine's always around 6.5, 6.2. And then you take your KH, and usually my KH is really low because I use RODI, but I do remineralize the water a bit. So want to be right in this range. Now, if you go lower than that or whatever, if you're injecting more CO2 and you're noticing that your fish or whatever, because I do use the photosynthesis and stuff like that, I don't really consider that ornamental fish stuff. But if you notice that they're gasping for air or whatever, then back your gas off a bit. If you notice your plants are purling or respirating, purling, sending off little air bubbles only an hour into the cycle, you should back it off a bit. You're probably putting too much gas in there. And CO2 can also, if you over-inject CO2, you can limit the growth of your plants. So it'll actually slow them down, which isn't a bad thing sometimes. If you're doing a competition scape and you have your plants where you want them, but you just need some final tweakings on certain areas, they'll blast the CO2. They'll crank it up and they'll leave it really high. They won't immediately crank it, they'll slowly raise it so it's not a huge fluctuation, but they'll raise it up to, well into the red and keep it there. Just because that'll keep the plants from fully growing. And it'll still keep algae at bay because they can just lower their lights and keep the limiting factors down. So this is what I was talking about, how everything should be a curve. There's always this happy little hump that you want to get to with everything. And it's all about finding it in your own tank. And it takes time. You have to go through and you have to find it. You have to do the work. But once you have those numbers for your tank, for your water, you don't have to do that again. Like you don't have to sit here and toy with your CO2 knobs or anything like that after you do it. You just, usually one time every time you change the tank, and you don't have to necessarily go back and do all the math again either, because the numbers stay the same as long as your source water stays the same. Now if something happens to your city water where it changes or if your well collapses or whatever, if you change your water source, yeah, then you have to go back and do this again because it's going to be different. So now we get into fertilization. This is like a super controversial area right now in like the aquatic horticulture world, because you have people on the EI side, the estimated index, which is throw everything I have at you and you will grow. Then you have people on the limiting side, limiting dosing side, like I'm gonna give you what I know you need, kind of thing, and hope that I'm right. And hope that I'm accounting for all the plant mass in the tank. So they both have their downfalls, because you either underdose and stunt your plants with one of them, or you're overdosing so much that you cause pinholes and algae and all sorts of other fun stuff and nasty, sediment building up, and yeah. So they both have their downfalls, but again, it all comes down to your water chemistry, because EI works really well if you got, elevated KH. If your KH is like 3 or 4, EI works amazing. Like, it just does. If your KH is 0 and you're using rich substrate and you're trying to do EI, I mean, I've had issues with it forever. But switching to a limiting system with the water that I have, a limited nitrate system, there's no issues. Like, I dose maybe 1 to 2 ppms of nitrate every 5 days, and they're fine, because I use extremely fertile soil. I use mineralized topsoil capped with aqua soil, and inside of that I put osmocote down in the plants, next to all the plants. So yeah, they're getting everything they need right there at the root base. They don't need a lot of column dosing. And that's how the Dutch have done it for years. They've been growing aquatic plants for longer than any civilization, I guess. They were the first people to make the first planted tank. But yeah, that's what they do. They use mineralized topsoil and all of these fertilizers inside, laterite, everything layered in the soils, because that's what these plants do. Like I was telling you before, most of them are emergent. Most of them are growing out of the water, undergrowing on land. They don't have column. They don't have the ability to absorb the nutrients that their leaves like people think. What you're waiting for is those nutrients to precipitate and go down into your substrate. Just skip that step. Feed them with the roots. That's what I do. That's what a lot of people have started switching to. But aside from that, there's 17 essential nutrients that you're going to need to feed these guys. 6 macro and 11 micro. And the hydrogen, obviously they're going to get that. They're in the water. So this is also for same plants, for terrestrial plants, they need the same thing. So you have all these nutrients that you have to give them, and they're all in different ratios, different orders, different times even, because if you dose some of them at the same time and the cleaters are different, yeah, you're going to have issues. They're going to precipitate, and your plants aren't going to pick them up. So again, talking about the dosing. Estimated index, you're throwing everything at it. You're dosing usually around 5 to 7 ppm of nitrate every other day. I just told you guys I do like 1.5 to 1.7 every like 3 days. So you're throwing a lot of nitrate in there, and that's what builds the algae up. You're also throwing a lot of phosphate in there, but phosphate necessarily isn't bad until you get to a certain point, then it becomes bad. Phosphate is necessary for keeping away GDA and GSA. It helps with that in the plants as well. They need it as an uptake. So if you're noticing like spots on your plants, you have like little green spots forming on your plants, or little green spots forming on your glass, or little green spots forming on your hardscape, it's your phosphate's low. You just need to elevate your phosphate a bit, and they'll go right away. or PMDD is something that not a lot of people do anymore because it's a limiting iron dose. You're basing your dosing off of how much iron you're giving your plants. And that goes back to when people believe that before we knew iron was an uptake nutrient, basically with aquatic plants. People thought it was a main macronutrient for the longest time. And they contributed to algae growth, they contributed to everything. Everything was iron's fault, and that's where the microtox thing came from. I don't know if you've ever heard of microtox ever, but people were going after Barr hard, Tom Barr, like really hard with EI, saying that, oh, microtox, you're killing plants, da-da-da, you're dosing this, da-da-da, it's the iron, you're da-da-da. And it turns out they were wrong, that they caused a huge uproar. And and that all came from misinformation. And that's what I said, misinformation equals failure. So if you are not 100% sure about what you're talking about, confer with someone. It never hurts to ask a question. And that's, where this hobby, like again, I praise the clubs like this. Like, it's awesome that you guys have people to go to, because there are areas that they don't. They rely solely on what they read on Facebook. They don't have face-to-face contact with people who've been in the hobby for X amount of years who have experienced these things. So it's just cool to be in there. Sorry, like I said, I divert a lot. I'm sorry. So then you have PPS Pro, which is more precise. That's kind of like what I do. I would say I do a modified EI, because I don't necessarily do full PPS Pro, because I'm not narrowing it down to the exact amount of whatever that it needs, because I'm trying to feed such a large variety of plants. So I limit it a bit, and I go a bit precise, but not as precise as PPS Pro. PPS Pro is kind of a pain in the butt. Like, that's for, if you're coming from the reef world, and you test your water religiously, PPS Pro is great for you, because you'll be able to know the levels of what it is all the time. But if you're just stepping into it, and you just kind of want to casually grow plants, that's not for you. What for you would be great for those types is the all-in-ones. APT Complete is, in my opinion, one of the best that are out there right now. It's a limited nitrate source all-in-one. It's the only limiting nitrate source all-in-one out there. It's great. The colors that come off of from dosing it, especially just following the directions, not even having to tweak it, just absolutely amazing. I think I have a picture of the tank I tested it on, but it's great. Thrive's not bad, but it's really heavy in nitrates and light in phosphate for some reason. So you experience a lot of random GSA or GDA, and again, Thrive with some extra phosphate, you're good. You have no issues. But that's, again, my personal experience. People may not experience that in their tanks. The CChem line gets a lot of flack from some growers now, but I like it. I've had some great experience with the CChem Flourish, and not Excel. That's not, don't use Excel. I'll get into that in a minute. But like CChem Flourish and CChem Phosphate and the CChem Iron and stuff like that, if you use that whole system, it's great. Especially if you use it, as to what you're supposed to do. It'll grow amazing plants. The tropical lines is I swear they're like the same. The CChem and tropical line are like the same thing, just a different color. But again, it works. The tropical works really, really well. Tropica has an all-in-one too that works really well. But if you're looking for something to try out, if you're trying to get into CO2 and you want a fertilizer, or even for low-tech or non-CO2 injected tanks, the APT Complete is really nice. When it comes down to dosing, like I said before, it's your water chemistry. Does anyone know offhand what their pH and GH is? Good. Just say it.
So out of the tap, pH is like 12, and the pH is like 3 and 4.
Do you grow CO2? Do you use CO2 at all?
Yeah.
Yep. How what are you noticing? As far as what you're having to dose, what do you dose? So,
Usually I do EI method,
yeah,
but I've kind of adjusted focus and it's just over there, so I've noticed that I can get away with a lot
yeah,
less work, you get kind of the same result.
yeah.
But
Yeah, with
So
your
I
kid.
dose when it looks like it's getting, or I see some hair algae setting in.
Yeah.
You know, I'll kind of maybe cut back the light if I don't want to dose, or I'll start dosing more, and it seems to kind of go away.
Okay. Yeah, the KH like that, you've got the right parameters for, definitely got the right parameters for doing EI.
Yeah, yeah.
So, right there, knowing your GH and KH offhand of your source water, that helps you know what to dose. It's information that I can give to you guys individually if you want. Like if you guys want to message me on Facebook, and I'm happy to help any of you guys individually if you message me and say, hey, my GH and KH is this, what should I do? I have no problem, you know, helping you guys out and getting you on the right track with the right fertilizer. Because the whole idea is to get people to succeed with plants and want to grow more plants. So if you guys need like individual, if you figure out your KH and GH and you want to know, I'll be happy to do that. I don't mind. So hearing all this, like people, like it's a lot of stuff going around. It's like, again, crazy. That's why I was saying, if you need it, I'm happy to help. Like I'll happily give my cards to whoever, and you guys can message me, whatever. So further into aquatic plants, you have taxonomy and identification. This is actually like my favorite part of plants now. Working with the flowers of these plants is amazing. Finding out some of the mistakes that people have made previously or myths that people have started with naming these plants is also really cool. Like the spath there, that's from a Cryptocoryne spiralis tiger. Originally, it was said that that plant doesn't flower for some reason because it's a mutant. It's another lab-created plant. But this goes back to the whole tissue culture failure. Tissue cultures genetically alter the plants, and sometimes it causes things to happen. So I may have gotten a batch of tissue culture that was viable to flower. No one else did. It just comes down to that simple. Or I'm doing something that other people aren't, but the people who I did this for, they know what they're doing. So that's the consensus right now, is that it's just the tissue culture anomaly. So to be able to do that though, what happened is a botanist in India, Fazal, was getting a lot of flack for falsely naming a plant or whatever. He was presenting the plant as something, and everyone was on his back saying it wasn't that it was Cryptocoryne spiralis tiger, and da-da-da-da, and until you flower it, you're a liar. Like they were getting on him, like really ridiculous. So doing that, he was able to use my picture and his picture of his spath and his actual snake skin and show the difference. So, I mean, even though you may not be a botanist or whatever, I'm not, you can still flower these plants and send these pictures to botanists who are studying in these fields, who are working in these fields, who don't have the time or may not be able to because of where they live, flower these plants. So that's, again, the plant library project. You know, it comes down to documenting and photographing what you're doing and sending it off to people and sharing it. And Rotella Mosiar cramer, this was the one that I found in the backyard. Yeah, I mean, being able to find stuff like this and identify it and put it out there, you know, it's cool. And understanding the different, you know, the internode sections here and measuring them and understanding, this is what I was talking to you guys, you have to know your plants when it comes down to if you're looking for certain species or particular species, if you're a collector or whatever. Like it's really easy to get duped these days, especially with online sales where you don't get to physically hold or see the plant. Biggest way to beat that is just ask the seller for a picture of the internode section, which is in between these two stems here. Every variant that I've come across of every plant has a different internode section measurement. So I mean, you can generally find that at Flowgrow. It's a website, flowgrow.de. It's a Dutch website. But they have a lot of this information already there. So you can go on and find it, and then you actually get specifics on the plants you're buying instead of having, hopefully getting what you want. Biotope 1, that was the company that I started with Edward Johnson in Canada. He's a tissue culture guru. This is why I started doing the identification and the conservation projects. Through him, we were able to now get plants from Borneo, India, because Canada has much leaner import policies than we do when it comes to fawn. And then from Canada, it can easily make its way to me. But yeah, so with Biotope 1, we're able now to get plants from all over the world. Access to plants that I didn't even know were out there for a long time until these guys started getting in touch and sending me videos of what they are in nature. Yusuke, a guy out of Japan who travels the world and finds cryptocoreans, has found some amazing stuff going places that he shouldn't, but he found them and was able to document them and test the soil and prove that they're there and send it back to us, and we're able to catalog it and make sure that if the census comes up in that area, we can say yes, it's there. Because we have a registered botanist on board and stuff, we're now able to do that. Before, when we first started, we didn't have a registered botanist, so whenever we tried to interfere in census counts or whatever, they just negated it. They're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you're just a hobbyist. So it's nice to be able to form the community. Because as a sole hobbyist, it's really hard to get anything done on a level like that. But as a group of people, it's so easy.